we are shaped by group-level selection processes so that we can be like bees in a hive. We are not just primates who evolved to fight it out with other primates. We are partway through a major transition in evolutionary history that allows us to be temporarily like bees in a hive. We see this after attacks. We saw it after 9/11. We can come together. Our propensity to find meaning, even though it may have evolved from simpler cognitive mechanisms, as Richard Dawkins and others maintain, I believe that our ability to find connections, to see connections in the stars, if we look up at the sky, we see stories about people wandering around and going on missions. I believe that our ability to find connections and meaning helps us merge together into groups that can function as one. So this is part of the psychology that allows us to create these emergent superorganisms, at least temporarily. Anyone who's ever been in a chorus or a band, or played a team sport, or been initiated into a fraternity, knows the joys, the ecstasy of losing yourself in part of a larger group. I think this is the next frontier for psychology and for the social sciences, is understanding that we are not radical individuals. We are actually, in part, bees in a hive, but we don't live that way, and that's the reason for much of our unhappiness. We are deeply and profoundly confirmation seekers, not truth seekers. The most important rule in psychology is that thinking is for doing. Now, there are some people whose task it is to find the truth, so you might think they would use thinking to find the truth. And there are some philosophers, I think, who are very open-minded. There are some. But for the most part, philosophers are human beings too, and they use reasoning to reach the conclusion that they find amenable or conducive. You have to look back at the divisions of the mind and realize that our language ability, our ability to think in words, did not come about so that we could figure things out. Language came about to communicate and especially to influence. We use reasoning to influence others, to manage a reputation, to work out, well, what will people think of me if I do this? And is that person trying to cheat me? We use reasoning in a Machiavellian way quite often. We are capable of using it to find the truth when we don't care about the truth. And this is why the natural sciences do such a good job. They can really reason their way to the conclusion offered by the data. In the social sciences, we have a big problem. Almost all of us are liberal, not in economics, but in psychology, sociology, and anthropology. Almost all of us are liberal. So we reason our way to conclusions we want to reach, which are liberal conclusions. And this makes it very hard for us to understand society, religion, politics, and ideology. The basic personality trait that predicts ideology best is openness to experience. This is just a fact about the distribution of personality types, just as some people are extroverted, some are introverted. It's always going to be the case, it's part of a genetic shuffle, that some people just like novelty, variety, and diversity. Other people like what's familiar. I'm really glad it's this way. We need, in any community, we need people of both types. But what happens now that we have so much geographic mobility is that people who are high in openness to experience can't stand to live in small towns. They all move to New York and San Francisco and Boston, create communities that are very high in openness to experience, in which there is no moral diversity, whereas other people who are born low on openness to experience move out. So we now get geographic and social clustering, where we only have to deal with people who are like us. The food is really, really good where we liberals live, because we like ethnic foods, we like variety. In the more conservative parts of the country, it seems like all the restaurants are Applebee's, because they don't like variety and diversity that much. So this basic personality trait drives so much else that happens and leads us to cluster into groups. It used to be that, at least if you were born in one place, you were likely to stay, most people stayed, and you associated with people who were near you but were often different from you. Not anymore. Now we've got lots of racial and ethnic diversity. That's great. But we've been able to purchase it at the cost of almost no moral diversity. The data suggests that Americans are among the happiest people in the world. The Scandinavians also do extremely well on that. The most important thing to realize for those who doubt that, for those who doubt that Americans are happy, is to realize that happiness is really local. Our society is screwed up in a lot of ways. We have a lot of poverty, we have a lot of injustice, we have a broken political system. And some of that matters for happiness, but for the most part, our happiness comes from our local environment, from our relationships, from having control over our lives. I do think the data suggests that freedom is good for people up to a point. Mobility and diversity are not so good for people. They do make us trust our neighbors less. So anything that fosters strong relationships and stable, healthy, cohesive communities is generally good for us. But anything that fosters enemy and distrust and chaos is bad for us. I think America could do a lot better. I think we could be even happier than we are if we could fix some of our social problems. But I do think that despite all of our problems, Americans seem to be doing pretty well on the happiness scale. The myth of pure evil is a term coined by the psychologist Roy Baumeister, which talks about a kind of a narrative that we all have in our minds. It's parodied most perfectly in the Austin Powers movies, in which there is a Dr. Evil who does evil because he loves to do evil. There's no other motive. He just likes to do evil. We, on the other hand, are perfectly good. We fight evil. So to the extent that you have bumper stickers on your car, things like if you don't like abortion, don't have one, you think that you are on the good side and those ignorant fools on the other side are evil, driven by ignorance or greed. We liberals tend to think about racism in this way especially. We think that racism is pure evil and racism happens for no reason. It just falls out of the sky and it's a disease and a virus. We must all unite to fight this pure evil. This is what I mean when I say morality is a team sport, and our side is united by fighting the pure evil of racism. The reality is always more complicated. As Baumeister shows, even in domestic violence, one of the most obvious cases, apparent cases of pure evil, whether you're looking at domestic violence, racial assaults, whatever it is, murder especially, there's usually an escalation. There's usually some fault on both sides. It hurts me to say that. I know that people watching this are going to be offended because I've just said something sacrilegious for our social justice side. But the reality is always more complicated. You cannot understand the atrocities in the world by thinking they are caused by evil. In fact, almost all atrocities are caused by people pursuing the good who believe that the ends justify the means. There is no pure evil. It's actually moral motives cloaked in a cloak of self-righteousness.